Hello, hello, David.
Hi.
This and Dead YouTube channel. So, we're going to talk about our top five. I've seen that T-shirt somewhere before. Look at that head.
I might have bought it off you.
There was a younger man many years ago.
Absolutely.
A less broken man. But I tell you what, if he could see where we were now, he wouldn't believe it. We live in this sci-fi dystopia.
No, yeah.
Go to the shop.
Very true. Very true.
Terrified. So, you know, I think we didn't realise that 2011 was a time of peace and plenty, wasn't it?
It was a cornucopia.
Yeah.
So are we back to talk more nonsense about like a band or something?
Doing Radiohead today. So we're going to do our top five Radiohead albums, and we'll perhaps have a little talk about the other ones as well.
Yes.
So band started in the 80s first, but rehearsing and just jamming for a long time before they got a record deal. So the first album's not in our top five, is it? But
no. Even though I said, you know, it's by far and away, we should really consider that to be the best album of all time.
Oh, of course, Pablo Honey is the greatest. No, it's a fair to middling indie rock album, typically of its time, isn't it?
It's a first album, isn't it?
Yeah. And Creep's a wonderful song. I mean, anyone can play guitar is not a bad tune. You know, Tom York writes non-embarrassing lyrics, which is always a bonus.
Yep.
He writes lyrics that don't make me cringe, which is rare. And he you know, even on the first album, the lyrics are pretty good. But yeah.
Well, although Creep, of course, was made some time before the album, wasn't it? It was like a sort of standalone single. And I still laugh at the story that Johnny Greenwood tells about how he sort of put that discordant, crashy guitar bit into it. It was because he didn't like the song. He was trying to mess it up so that. Yeah.
The first time I ever saw Radio was on Top of the Pops, and I sort of thought, you know, I wasn't really interested. And then I remember that heavy guitar came in, thinking, "Oh, this is brilliant. This is," you know. And then it stopped again, and it's like a bit like that Beavis and Butthead thing where they're watching Radiohead going, "This bit's great," and then this bit sucks, and you know, this bit like that. So, but I love Creep. It's a great song.
When was you saying the first time you saw them was on Top of the Pops? Was that?
I saw them on Top of the Pops, and I didn't really think much to them. And then I was an Enemy tape which had what song was it on it? My Iron Lung, I think, was on it. No,
okay,
not My Iron Lung. One of the songs from the Bends. Which one was it? Bulletproof. He had Bulletproof on it, and it was on an NME tape, and that was really good. And I thought, oh, I love the guitar layering on it, and the sort of so the arrangement was really cool. And then I went out and got the Bends. So the Bends is in our top five, isn't it, David?
It is, absolutely. Their second album. Yeah. That was where I came in. Because I first saw Radiohead on Later with Jules Holland, sort of back in the old days, and they did High and Dry, and I think the other song that they did was The Bends, was the title track. And I can remember Yvette and I watching it on the telly and thinking, this is brilliant. It was one of those situations where the following day I went up to the Virgin Megastore and got a copy of the Bends on CD. So that was the start of it.
Yeah, I was really excited when the album came out. I was really excited to hear it, and it's a great record because I mean it's quite. It doesn't sound as dramatic as it did at the time because it's been so ripped off.
Yes,
there's lots of bands like sort of Coldplay and Muse sort of got all their their sound from that mixed with a bit of Jeff Buckley as well. And so, but I listened to it again actually today, and the songs are just fantastic. Every tune in it.
It's still my wife's favourite Radiohead album.
It's a great album,
and it's a proper rocker as well. It's like it's like it's balls out rock to a very large extent.
Well, the way they're layering guitar parts is remarkable. The songwriting's really high standard. I mean, High and Dry. It's almost like a crowded house song, isn't it? It's almost got that. It's got that quite
yes,
melodic.
sort of the way that it kind of sort of skips through the riff.
But the songwriting's great, and it's got that sort of Pixies thing. It's going, but it's very original, and it's got its own sort of there's a bit of sort of art rocky sort of thing there, isn't there?
Yeah. No, it is still an album which I still listen to quite a lot.
Yeah, no, I listen to it a lot as well. And Just is my favourite song on the Bends. I love that.
Mine is probably Black Star.
Yeah, that's great.
I just like the sort of I like the riff and the way it fades in. There aren't many songs that fade in, but that one doesn't.
That's great. Yeah,
it's brilliant the way that it does that. That's probably my favourite one.
It's weird. It's very strange because it was very, very, very influential. And when it came out, I mean, it was right in the middle of Britpop, wasn't it?
Yes.
And it sort of stood out a mile, didn't it?
It was that sort of time, but it was so different to what those other bands were doing.
I mean, the only band I'd say in the same era, probably Manson, were quite similar.
Yes.
A bit later on, Ultrasound came through, doing sort of somewhere, some bits of prog, and obviously then you had all that deluge of Muser-like Coldplay type bands, didn't you? Where it was all that sort of
a lot of that going on. Yeah, but Ben's brilliant record.
It is it's really well structured as well.
Yes.
Every track works going into the next one. So we're going to move on chronologically.
Let's do chromatically as well.
See what key the songs are in. Chronologically, in our top 5 would be OK Computer, because you can't not have OK Computer in there. It's probably my favourite album of all time by anybody. So
that's interesting.
It's probably It's definitely the album I've listened to most of any album by anybody.
That's interesting, because I remember when it came out, and I snapped it up, because by that time I was well into my Radiohead by that stage. I'd listened to Pablo Honey and thought, okay, but the Benz was where it was at. Got OK Computer, and I was obsessed with it for months. I just didn't stop listening to it. I had it recorded on my Walkman, and I was commuting to work and listening to it over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, no, me too. Yeah.
And I think probably a little bit too much, because I got to the stage where I'd had enough of it.
Yeah, well, it's easily done that. I mean,
yeah,
I never really got to, it's one of the few albums I've never got to that stage with. I mean, I don't know why, because I got a bit like that with Kid A. I can't listen to Kid A too often because I listen to it too much. But
right.
I remember I was working in a t-shirt shop at the time, and I remember on Radio 1 when the Paranoid Android single came out, and it was just like you couldn't believe this song was on the radio. It was just like this song that was basically
it's long, weird single
in 9/8 that moved through three or four different sections. It's like
And what was interesting was this was at a time when I wasn't listening to much prog, in fact hardly any. And when Paranoid Android was released as a single, and then when I heard it on the album, I was thinking, actually, this is probably the sort of the prog thing I've heard for quite a long time.
It's got a mellotron at the end of it.
Yeah,
a mellotron choir.
I know. I just wasn't expecting that, and even down to the first track, Airbag.
I love that. Yeah.
When you've got that guitar bit at the start of it, which sounds
very crimson, isn't it?
Quite fripp, yeah. It's like got that sort of thing going on. So, but yeah, I mean, I've obviously gone back to it since, and it is just a cracking record. OK Computer. It was kind of overdone. I used to read. I don't know if you were reading Q magazine at that time.
It treated as the work of the gods at the time, wasn't it?
Q magazine had a sort of best album of all time poll, either a year or two afterwards, and OK Computer was their best album of all time, and I think the Benz was number 2.
But what a time! I mean, what a time to be alive, though. That a band could release an album, it could possibly considered be one of the best albums of all time, because it just wouldn't happen now, would it?
No, it wouldn't.
You know,
Because
there's
basically you're dead in the water if you're releasing music now.
well, it's you can't imagine an album having that much cultural impact, can you? Because
No.
there's not the mass media for it to be distributed through, and you know, the world's a very different space. I mean, I saw them on this tour, and they were amazing. I saw them at the Birmingham NEC, and notoriously one of the gigs that Tom York absolutely hated, and they were brilliant. They were absolutely brilliant. But it was, yeah, it was just the cultural impact. I mean, there's the video of them doing Paranoid Android later, just unbelievable. They were just,
Yeah.
I mean, there was Johnny Green was running from like synth mellotron to guitar, you know, and playing all these different parts. It was incredibly inspiring for me.
He was playing the xylophone at one point.
Yeah, it was
God knows what
incredibly.
else. Wasn't that around about the time we had to have his arm in a brace?
Yeah, he's
Because
arm in a brace. Yeah,
it was a repetitive strain injury from
yeah.
playing guitar.
But I mean, one of the interesting things at the time, it was all about sort of Johnny's guitar playing.
Yeah.
But as they've gone on, Ed O'Brien's turned out to be a killer sound design guitarist. Yeah. I love Ed O'Brien's guitar playing, and all three of them.
I've always liked it. I always enjoyed his parts because
really great.
Because they were the bits that I could imagine. If I was going to be any of the members of Radiohead, I'd want to be Ed O'Brien.
Yeah,
because I think he has the most interesting things to do.
He's like their Eno, really. He's got the sound. He just does all the sound design stuff, doesn't he?
Yeah, yeah.
There's that brilliant video of him on that pedal show.
That's fascinating.
Oh, it's brilliant, and you see all that gear. He's, you know, the way he manipulates those sounds, and then you watch it. I must say, the Radiohead website's got some fantastic live gigs on it. They've got an archive of all the recent, you know, the live gigs over from the last sort of 25 years or so. And there's some amazing stuff on there. I mean, they were, you know, and I love each era of the band as they're doing different stuff as well, which is pretty remarkable. But yeah, it was, you know, and almost that album coming out was almost the end of the Britpop party as well. It was kind of that's where it all sort of finished, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah, it was all pretty much over by that point.
Because you'd had sort of 08, you know, 94, 95. You know, Oasis, Blur. It was like everyone was pretending it was the 1960s, basically, weren't they?
Yes, they were doing their best anyway.
And we all sort of held hands, and then, you know, and Blair got in, and there was a lot going on, wasn't there?
That was a moment of sort of great optimism. The whole sort of round about 97.
Yeah,
it's an era I remember very well for a number of reasons. The music being one of them. It was my son was born in 1997.
Oh.
Then, of course, later that year, New Labour got in, which
it was a very optimistic time, wasn't it?
It was optimistic. I mean,
and a band could release a song in funny time to on it and go into the charts.
There's a discussion to be had about whether or not that optimism was justified, but perhaps we better gloss over that.
Probably not the forum for it, but
no.
But the point being that, you know, at the time it felt like anything was possible, and like to see Radiohead come out with an album like that was so inspiring, and so it didn't feel like, you know, it feels a lot of time like, you know, people often say to me everything's been done with rock music. It's like, well, I don't think that's true, because people said that 20 years ago, and it's been proved again and again. It's never, you know,
there's always something new. And I think that's absolutely true. There's always something new.
So the next one in our top 5 would be Kid A.
It would.
Now, when Kid A came out, I was sorely disappointed, because it doesn't sound anything like OK Computer.
Yeah.
And to me, it sounded like my mates. Not a lot of my mates are into like the Warp Record stuff, and I was kind of into that stuff. I mean, I wasn't as into it as they were, but I knew Square Push and Aphex Twin and all that stuff, and I'd listen to it around my mates' houses, and I had some of those records, and I liked them, and I knew that stuff. I knew Warp Records. I knew. So when it came out, everyone was sort of saying how sort of revolutionary it was, where I was sort of thinking, well, it sounds a lot like Aphex Twin, and you know, that sort of thing. I'm not sure it's this wonderful new thing, but the more I listened to it, the more I got into it and realised there were some really deep songwriting hooks and stuff like Everything in Its Right Place is just a really genius record. You know, in terms of the actual song, you know,
Yeah.
it's really well written song. And you know, and another thing is, I saw them on this tour, and they weren't very good. They were rubbish, to be honest.
I,
um,
I think they were having quite a bad time round
yeah,
about that.
but it was
that
they
period.
weren't really. The new material didn't mix in with the old material, and
Yes.
you know, but you see them doing it now, and it works completely. I think they just had this is on that tent tour they did, and
Yeah.
it was a bit. It weren't very good, to be honest. It was just a bit sort of. It was. I think they were struggling with the sound and trying to make it work, and it was a bit weird. It was definitely a bit weird.
I
But as
was
an album now, it's probably the one I listened to. I obsessively listened to it a lot about 10 years ago.
my experience is probably similar in that when I first heard it, I thought, so where have the guitars gone then?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
And you know, I liked I I'm much later to the party when it comes to all that sort of more I don't know how you would describe it, but that
yeah,
sort
the
of
electronic.
material much later to the party. And, you know, back then and even now, if you sort of scratch away the surface, I'm more of a sort of a straightforward rock type of guy.
Mm.
Um, but later on, I really got into the tunes. It is the songs on there, so you know, everything in its right place is fantastic, and
Yeah,
uh,
because it's really
yeah,
clever. It's a lot cleverer than the first time you hear it, but then you realise it's in fives and it's moving around in funny orders, and there's a lot more going on than you originally sort of realised, isn't there?
it is one of those albums where I must admit I struggle to remember the names of the individual songs. That's something that's happened as part of the CD era, I think,
I
is
agree.
that you don't spend as much time sort of looking at the album art as you used to. Um, That's arguably the one thing where I think vinyl is probably better. This is the only
Yeah,
time, listeners, that you will ever hear me say that vinyl is better than CD,
I
because
think
it's not the
because
end of the
at
world.
the time the vinyl was sort of dance music. There wasn't a lot of rock vinyl, was there? Really, most.
No, there wasn't. It more or less sort of died by that point.
I bought. I mean, I had Kid A. I think it was the early days of Napster, and I might have got it off Napster actually.
Okay.
Bought it afterwards. But I think it was one of those albums that was distributed early on Napster. I think it was around that era. And
I got the CD, and I remember sort of not being terribly pleased with it, and I loaned it to a colleague at work who wasn't a rock guy at all. He was into his dance music, and he listened to it and really enjoyed it.
mm,
So you know, that was that I think was sort of a demonstration of the transition. And uh, you know, at the time I was a bit pissed off. I'm sort of thinking to myself, oh, for goodness sake, you know, this is a bit
yeah,
of a
it
too big
seemed
a
a bit of
change.
a.
But then I thought afterwards, well, actually, really, why should they make music to please me? You
Could
know?
you imagine the pressure it would be on you though if you'd made an album, right, and someone had said it was the best album ever made within
Yes.
a year of it coming out, and then you had to follow that up. Can
What do
you?
you do? Yeah.
I mean, most bands would have knocked it on the head, wouldn't they?
Yes, but they didn't. They basically just did something completely different.
So they sort of, I think that was the best, quite a clever way to deal with that. You know what I mean? Rather than
Yes.
um, rather than go, you know, because it was their U2 moment. They could have been like the next sort of U2 sort of size band, couldn't they? Could have been
They could have
massive.
gone down that route. They could have started doing the sort of the big stadiums and
Mm,
so on. A bit like when in the last video we were talking about, you know, when King Crimson reached the stage where they were touted as possibly being the next Pink Floyd,
mm.
and what they did was to split up.
Yeah, you decide whether you're going to be a when you were the focus on being an artist or being on a careerist, isn't it? So,
Yeah, exactly.
and
Whereas
I'm not
Radiohead,
saying that you can't make commercial records and still not being, you
yeah,
know, you still can be an artist then. But I'm saying that sometimes, you know, and I think probably saved the band because we got another, you know, 5 albums or whatever after that. You know what I mean? So,
yeah.
right, should we move on to Amnesiac?
Yes, I mean, Amnesiac's an album which I think of as being kind of a piece with Kid A. They're very
Mm.
similar. and I think they were actually substantially written at the same time.
That's right. Yeah.
So they sort of come from they're sort of cut from the same cloth. But there are some key differences. I mean, one of them, for instance, is they bring in a jazz band to play on a track. Was it the national anthem? That was the one I think that they played on.
On this one, it's no, it's Life in a Glass House.
Life in a Glass House. But
Right. Yeah, that's right.
I think that's really clever. And I think of the two, I think I probably would go with Amnesiac by a whisker.
It's difficult. I mean, for me, I like this. I like Knives Out is my favourite song of that era because it's just got a really clever chord sequence. And
that's a brilliant song. Yeah.
Pyramid Song's brilliant.
Those are two I think they still play live.
They do, yeah. Morning Bell, the version of Morning Bell on this one's really good.
It's quite different from the one on Kid A, isn't it?
Yeah, the Kid A version's in. I think one of them's in 5, one of them's in 4. But yeah, they were. You know, when this one came out, I wasn't that into it. I'll be honest with you, because I sort of lost interest a little bit by then. But when I came back to it fairly recently, I loved it, and it was a really, more I listened to it. It's one of Steve Clayton's favourite albums of all time, I think.
Oh, that's interesting.
He loves it because he loves, he loves all the electronic stuff. So, but yeah, no, I really like it as well. So, yeah.
I think by the time it was released, I'd kind of got over myself a bit and given Kid A little bit more of a chance. So I was a bit more receptive to it.
People were less shocked by it then, weren't they?
Yeah, I think so. And I think,
but yeah, no, it's got Humphrey Littleton on it.
Yes, absolutely, Humphrey Littleton. I mean, who'd have thought?
Right at the end.
More famous for I'm sorry, I haven't a clue. By that stage, than his very long and illustrious career as a jazz man.
There's a song called Dollars and Cents, which has got that sort of krautrock feel I really like as well.
Right, yeah.
And that came back on the last album, didn't it? There's one on the last album that's got the same sort of feel on it as well. I can't remember what it's called. But
the album's Moonshaped Pool.
Moonshaped Pool. I can't remember what the song's called. I can't remember what it's called, but it's got a very similar sort of riff on it. Okay, so next was Hail to the Thief, which I like Hail to the Thief.
Yeah, and we haven't included in our top 5, have we?
In the top 5, but I'd say the first 2 songs, absolutely blinding. But the problem with Hail to the Thief, 2 + 2 = 5, and Sit Down, Stand Up is probably my favourite opening to any Radiohead album. However,
and after that, it kind of tails off.
Yeah, it tails off, and it's got there's too many songs on it. It's another way. I don't think any band needs to make an album that's 56 minutes long.
No, it's too long.
40 minutes tops, isn't it?
Yeah. Particularly for this sort of thing. If you're doing some other sort of
epic,
some other sorts of music, you can probably get away with it. But no, it is overlong.
It just feels too. Those first 2 songs are so strong, and I think they're 2 + 2 = 5. Just brilliant.
It's one of their best songs.
Oh, just brilliant song. And then it floats into Sit Down, Stand Up. It's just absolutely fantastic. But the rest of the album, it's got some cracking moments, but it's just not quite as strong all the way through, is it?
No, I agree with that. And again, you know how you associate certain music with particular points in your life, and that's one I can remember listening to as I was walking through Regent's Park. I used to work in Regent's Park, not as a gardener, you understand, but I would be listening to that as I was walking to and from the tube station, and I used to play the opening and then kind of sort of listen to a little bit more of it and then put something else on. By that stage,
it was definitely those first 2 tracks were the ones. I saw them because I think it's like recording a couple of weeks as well, so it's not quite
okay.
Whereas the other album took years the previous ones took years to make. I was working in a record shop, and obviously a new radio album was a moment of complete excitement. And yeah, it's still got some cracking stuff on it. So the last one in our top 5, David, is very wonderful in rainbows, which is
Yeah.
probably my favourite album of the tens of the zeros or whatever it's called that decade.
Oh, okay.
I love it in rainbows. It's I mean, it was just when it came out, and it was so exciting to hear, because basically they went rock again, didn't they?
Yes, it was more of a rock album. That was the one I think they released without any sort of preamble.
Yeah, I mean, it was a little bit overshadowed by the pay what you want thing they did.
Yes, they did that. They did that with
website,
it.
didn't they?
Initially, it wasn't. I don't think it was. Was it not initially available on any physical format? I think
No physical form, and then I think you could pre-order.
Yeah.
This was out. You could pre-order a physical copy later on.
Yes.
So you bought your. I quite like this way, do you bought it, pay what you want, but you could pre-order it. I think it was like a double vinyl, because there was an extra disc with a song called Bangers and Mash, which is brilliant. There's some really good tunes on there. So there's a bonus disc that had a song called Bangers and Mash and a few, like 7 or 8 bonus songs. And then you could buy like so it's a free album, but then you could buy a 40 quid vinyl or CD package with loads of extra stuff on it.
Yeah.
So I think they made a lot of money out of it.
Well, fine, because it's good.
There was no money involved in that. But yeah, it was a weird one because it was kind of that. It kind of got a little bit overshadowed by people talking about the way it was released, because of the
yes, the whole sort of mode of the whole.
What did you think of that, David? The free album stuff?
I don't know. I mean, it's difficult.
It works if you're Radiohead.
It works if you're Radiohead. I don't think it works for everyone if you're not.
It doesn't work for a small band, does it?
If people want to pay for it, so
exactly.
I think I remember
there already, haven't you?
I think I remember paying a £5 for it or something.
Yeah.
For the downloads, and in fact, I think this is an album I don't to this day own on CD.
No, it was a weird. I mean, I remember when I was working in record shops at the time, and the CD came out a few months later, and it's still sold. And I remember people buying it, thinking, why are people buying it? Because we've already bought it already. But people still bought it, so shows people like CDs, doesn't it?
They still bought it because the people liked CDs in those days, and it was Radiohead.
Yeah, and people still bought it.
They wanted to sort of have it on their shelves. But there are some brilliant songs. Again, you've got a really good sort of 1-2 opening.
Yeah,
with 15
yeah.
stuff, Body Snatches. And the Body Snatches is just amazing.
Yeah, that riff. Have you seen the From the Basement version of that, David?
I haven't.
So there's a thing on there. Nigel Goodrich, the producer dude, had a From the Basement TV show and online show, and that's on the YouTube. So have a look on the YouTube channel for that. That's got the whole of the album played live.
Oh, nice.
And, I love that era of the band. There's just a magic to that. They really had the swagger. They had the whole. They were locked in so well together. The songwriting was so strong. Every track's a winner on that, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a cracking record. I can remember it's the last one. If I'm honest, it's the last one which I really sort of remember listening to when it came out and thinking, yeah, I'm really enjoying this. I kind of sort of my interest tailed off. I think I was getting back into the prog stuff, which may or may not be a good thing. So I was kind of sort of losing interest in that, but it was one which struck me as being very strong and which I really enjoyed.
Yeah, it was definitely the sort of it was just nice to see someone at that stage in their career make another great record. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was like,
yeah, absolutely.
So then the next one is this isn't in our top 5, but we might have to talk about these last two as well. King of Limbs is their take on. It always reminds me of Talking Heads. Talking Heads.
Okay. Yeah.
What's the Talking Heads sound? Raining the Light.
Remaining Light.
Yeah, that one. Always reminds me of that sort of thing, where it's all sort of little loopy bits, and there's like little loops of different sections, and
yeah, it's quite glitchy, isn't it?
It's cool. I really like it.
I must admit, I'm not a great fan of the King of Limbs.
I don't think there's that many standout songs on it, but I think in terms of ideas, it's great. They're trying stuff. And one thing I will just say as well, as these last few albums, one of the things that you really notice is Colin Greenwood's a great underrated bass player. He's a
Fantastic
bass
bass player.
And him and Phil, the drums and bass are really locked in. And the way Ed O'Brien, Johnny Greenwood's always been an outstanding guitar player, and Johnny Greenwood always gets in like the best guitarist of all time and all that stuff. But Ed O'Brien, in terms of sound design, is just fantastic. Each album he's coming up with all these new sounds, and that's kind of his job within the band, is coming up with these really interesting sounds.
The thing about all of the records actually is they all sound really, really good.
Yeah, there's loads going on, in terms of the songwriting, and obviously, I think Tom York writes lovely words as well, which is not. I'm someone who plays an instrumental rock band. I'm not that bothered about words a lot of the time, but I'd say that Tom York's writes lovely words, and that's quite unusual for me to say that. Most of them.
I couldn't tell you any of the words from their later albums, and that's probably more because of the way that I listen to a lot of music these days.
Because you're always running around and stuff.
Yeah, and I like the sound of his voice though. I think he's got a really interesting voice.
Yeah, he's got a lovely. So we had that remix collection, which wasn't very good.
No.
Which is, to be honest. So the last album was Moonshaped Pool, which I really loved as well. That could have gone in my top 5 as well. Moonshaped Pool, once again, it's nice to see a band that's been together for a very long time releasing something that's still good. Burn the Witch, the first single, has got his, there's really staccato strings on it.
And that amazing video.
Yeah, the Camberwick Green one.
Camberwick Green video.
Brilliant.
Marvellous.
But there's loads of really interesting. Daydreaming's a great song. String arrangements are really strong. The live tour, all the footage I've seen, I couldn't get tickets to see them, but all the live stuff from this tour is brilliant. I really like the arrangements on this.
Yes.
They did a song called Spectre, which was for the Bond soundtrack, but they didn't use it. And that's got very similar strings on it, sort of, those sort of the sort of flowy strings they got on Moonshaped Pool.
Yes.
Daydreaming's a really good track. What's the one with the krautrock riff on it? I can't remember what it's called. But
yeah. Again, I would struggle to give you the sort of the names of the individual songs because I tend to listen to it as a whole album.
As a chunk. But there's, it was just nice to see them come together and do something that was, decent after all this time. And the last track, True Love Waits, was been a live song since 1995, and they finally recorded it, and they recorded this really beautiful, simple version of it. And it was, if this is their last album, I think it's a good way to finish it. It's a bit like, it sort of ties up all the loose ends. I hope it's not the last one, but
I mean, they haven't said it will be. So
no, and I think, it's just very rare for a band to stay. There's not many other examples of a band that's been going since they were at school, and now they're in their 50s and they're still going, isn't there?
With the same lineup.
With exactly the same. Can you think of many other examples? U2 have retained the same lineup, haven't they?
Rush did.
Right. Yeah, the second.
Well, there was one lineup change, but it was very early on.
Yeah. Blur mostly, they've got the original lineup back now, but they didn't retain it for everything. But most bands, I think the key to that, you notice all the songs are credited to all 5 of them.
Yes.
I think that's the key to keeping a band together.
That's interesting because you mentioned Talking Heads earlier, and I've just read Chris France's autobiography, Remain in Love, which
is a bit bitter.
He's a very bitter man, but there's a lot of stuff on there about songwriting credits, and about the sort of the divisiveness that it can cause. Although, of course, in his case, he's putting it all down to David Byrne being manipulative.
Right.
And how much of that you take with a pinch of salt, I don't really know. But he was saying exactly the same thing. If you credit all the songs to the band and have it as a unit,
I think it's the best way.
It's the best way for him. Genesis used to do it before Peter Gabriel left. They were doing that, and afterwards they stopped. and that was when people started leaving in droves.
Quite often, though, the thing that a track written by a band, written by a songwriter and then developed by a band, a lot of the time it might be the drummer's part or the bass player's part that makes the tune.
Yes.
So, thinking about Radiohead again, like Airbag, for example, so much of that is the rhythm section, is it? And then, the other layer, and then Ed O'Brien's wavy delay guitar over the top. And, there's so many bits to it that are, it's a very complex sound. It's not, if it was just guitar and vocals, you wouldn't have, half that magic there, would you?
No, and I guess that it doesn't hurt that from a commercial perspective they're all getting the same.
Exactly. So, what do you think? How much of Radiohead impacted guitar music in the last 30 years?
I think probably in the early days, very much so. It's like you were saying. It's difficult to listen to the Bends now and not think of all the bands who ended up being influenced by them, by that huge sort of wall of guitar sound and the way that they were doing it. I think in terms of how they've influenced guitar music since, I'm not really that qualified to say. I think their influence was probably greater in the early days. Since then, they've gone ahead and ploughed their own furrow and been influential in other ways.
Kid A influenced a lot of more experimental rock acts, I think.
I think that's
in terms of just doing your own thing, or in the last 20 odd years, I think it was post-genre music, they call it, where taking influences from lots of different stuff. And but, for me, I think the thing I find most inspiring about the band is that they continue to be the true definition of ambitious or progressive rock music, in that they've tried something different. It might not have always worked. I'm not saying The King of Limbs is a great album. There's some interesting sounds on there, and there's sonically it's a very inspiring album, but I'm not saying it hasn't got the best tunes on it, but at least they tried. And what frustrates me about a lot of the contemporary progressive scene is, there'll be people who knock an album out every year or every other year, and it's the same album every couple of years.
It's just a rehash.
And it's they'll instead of trying to come up with new ideas, people aren't approaching it on a conceptual level. They're approaching it just to get product out. And I kind of get that, because a lot of small bands, they say they've got 5,000 or 10,000 or 1,000 fans, and they have to keep knocking product out to support that fan base. However, they're not thinking of their long-term legacy by creating music that's going to be talked about by two nerds on Zoom in 2020 as the world collapses around us. So, I think that's why there's going to be that legacy of really wonderful music will remain, because they made really interesting records. And whether, their records that resonate with us, I don't think they've made anything that's not amazing in its own way. And I expect, certainly since the Bends. And I think, their contemporaries are more your Floyds and your Beatles rather than the bands of today. They're in that lineage of
they're peers in a sense. They're sort of from the point of view of the way that they operate and what they're doing. Absolutely.
So just to finish, then, are they a prog band, David?
Oh, I don't bloody know. No, they're not a prog band in the sort of classic sense of what a prog band is supposed to be. I think they're progressive in their outlook, in that they're always trying to do something interesting and new with their music. So in that sense, yes. I know that in the past, Tom York has been quite sniffy about the expression progressive rock being used to describe them. And I think I kind of get where he's coming from.
Well, I mean, you can see. I mean, I don't care what anyone calls us as long as they're listening. But I can see that the trouble was the grand prog experiment went a bit wrong a few times. So you can see why people would choose to distance themselves from it. But however, I think that you can't argue that a song like Paranoid Android that features multiple sections, funny time signatures, and a mellotron, isn't. I mean, that does reference progressive music. I mean, that's.
Yeah, I think of OK Computer as probably being their proggiest album.
Yeah, I think that's a progressive rock album. If I, you can't get the Mellotrons and the funny time signature out and not have people say a little bit prog, isn't it?
It's probably no coincidence that that's the one that I listen to the most.
Yeah, and same here. I love that record. It's a really special record, right?
Yeah, I'd say that is my favourite one. So.
No, me too. Yeah. So if we're going to just say one final one, I think we both say OK Computer. It's a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason. And
yep.
At the time, it was just so that when they were on Jules Holland Later on the BBC and they did Paranoid Android,
yes.
I just thought, here we go. This is it. This is what we've been waiting for. This is I was a kid who'd had guitar lessons from a guy into the Mahavishnu Orchestra and stuff. And I was like, here we go. Mainstream band, funny timings, all over the place, massive. This is the next level. This is here we go. This was just this.
This is where it's at. Yeah.
And
no,
then,
it is. Yeah.
Oh well, right. On that bombshell. Thank you, David. I really enjoyed doing that.
Matt.
I shall stop recording now. Ta-da!
Cheers. Bye.